Creating an Oracle database. Now at this point you understand how to install the Oracle software and bring up an instance. However, an instance is of no use to us as database administrators unless that instance is attached to a database. So our goals for this nugget are A, how to use the Database Configuration Assistant, also called the DBCA, to install the database files, and then we'll look at the suite of built-in first-party Oracle database administration tools with which we administer said database. Let's get to work. I want to share with you a couple good books as well as a good site before we get started. I apologize for the poor screenshots here. You can hardly read this first one. This first one is E.F. Codd's The Relational Model, and the one on the right from O'Reilly Press is C.J. Date's SQL and Relational Theory. Now you're probably wondering, who are E.F. Codd and C.J. Date? You need to understand who Edgar F. Codd was. He is the founder and inventor of SQL and the relational database model. You need to understand a little bit about him. He's a British guy. He worked for IBM, and his book, The Relational Model for Database Management Version 2, is his last publication in which he summarizes the relational database model. You can't get more fundamental than reading E.F. Codd and C.J. Date. C.J. Date, who's still alive, is also a British guy, specialist in relational database theory, worked with E.F. Codd at IBM, and also I think he's a better teacher actually than Edgar Ted Codd was, and I think his books are a little bit more approachable. So please read those books. Any DBA worth his or her salt needs to read Codd's and Date's foundational texts. Also, on the website front, orana.info. This is the Oracle News aggregator site, and this is essentially a web-based RSS feed with all of the latest blog postings from Oracle.com and other sites, news sites, blogs, whatever, that reference Oracle. So what's cool about this and why this should be part of any Oracle administrator's daily read is that it just gives you the very cutting-edge news with reference to Oracle products. So that's orana.info. Now to get into the meat and potatoes of this nugget, let's consider some database planning questions. A database is an organized collection of information that is treated as a unit. If you've read E.F. Codd or C.J. Date, you understand all about tables and the relationships that take place between those tables. The purpose of a relational database system is to ideally eliminate data duplication and to enforce integrity both within tables and referential integrity among linked or related tables. Now, before you fire open the DBCA and just lay down an Oracle database, there are several planning questions that we need to answer. Remember, I mentioned in the introductory nuggets that there's often a separation of powers between the database administrators and the system admins. System admins are generally in control of the servers themselves, the disk subsystem, the host operating system. So a lot of these planning questions impinge upon the sysadmin's work. Storage is chief among them. Oracle Database stores its data and metadata in binary data files that are going to need some kind of disk-based storage. How are we configuring disks? Are we using locally attached disks that are internal to the chassis of each server, the traditional SCSI disk or ATA disk or SATA disk? Are we using storage area networking and fabrics of disks? Are we using network-attached storage devices, which can be as rudimentary as an external drive cage? How are we doing this? And then specifically with those drive arrays, are we implementing the redundant array of inexpensive disks or RAID subsystems? What kind of RAID are we doing? RAID 5, RAID 10? This comes into our database planning because we need to think about how we're physically organizing our database. This brings to mind the concept of physical architecture versus logical architecture. In Oracle, when we talk about physical architecture, we're referring to the database files. We're referring to the data files that store the data and the metadata. We're referring also to the control file that tells the Oracle instance where to find those data files. And we're also concerned with the redo log files that write all changes to the database and keeps them there separately such that those SQL statements can be replayed in the event of data recovery. Logical stuff in Oracle means these are aspects of Oracle that are not directly related to the file system or the server's hardware. Obviously, we need a directory location for data files, control files, and redo log files. But what about a table space? Table space is not a file system object. It's not a file that has an extension, right? Like CTL for a control file or .log for a log file. Table space, if nobody's ever told you this, is the rough equivalent to the Microsoft SQL Server file group. It's a logical abstraction that contains one or more data files. It's a logical boundary such that Oracle doesn't need to necessarily care what the physical disk geometry and disk arrangement is. All it cares about is which table space is which data file associated with. So we need to plan all that stuff out prior to running the database configuration assistant. What data types will be stored within your data tables? That's a whole other aspect of database design that is, fortunately or unfortunately, beyond the scope of the training. We deal with data types to a much greater degree of depth in the SQL Fundamentals 1 training. Future growth. We always want to keep in mind future growth possibilities in the database. Now that hits all hardware subsystems, doesn't it? Storage, as your data needs expand. Memory, as the size of the database, the number of transactions that are occurring on that database go up. The number of user sessions that are created, especially if Oracle is running in dedicated server mode, where a separate server process is spawned for each user connection. That's going to hit your RAM. Your network bandwidth can be constrained depending upon what's going over the wire. We want to make sure when we're planning the database to not undersize initially and yet not oversize. That's why performance tuning is so key in Oracle. The Oracle folks have done such a wonderful job of automating a lot of these decisions because, I mean, let's face it, it's a tremendous amount of knowledge for any one person to have. That having been said, you still need to use your noggin and master these technologies to appropriately size your database in terms of hardware to software ratios. Data access type, are we using a database primarily for short-term frequent transactions, what's called an online transaction processing or OLTP environment? Or by contrast, are we in more of a data warehousing, business intelligence, data analysis scenario called online analytical processing, in which queries can run for much longer periods of time? You'll want to tune your database initialization parameters depending upon which of these data access types the database is primarily focused on. Now, you'll find when we run the database config assistant, there are some pre-done templates that Oracle gives us. Actually, there's an OLTP one and an OLAP one. So again, Oracle comes to our rescue in giving us best practices to start out with. Finally, we have the issue of character set. A character set, you can look at it as kind of a character map. It's a way to represent alphanumeric and non-alphanumeric characters within the database. And the basic point to consider here is whether or not you want to go Unicode. Unicode contains all of our Earth's languages within its map. So there's a discrete address code for the yen symbol. There's a discrete Unicode code for the euro symbol or the US dollar symbol. Or think of Mandarin, or think of a Far Eastern language that uses characters rather than our standard Arabic numerals and letters. Unicode contains glyphs and codes for all of those shapes. So you want to choose the character set that fits your environment. If by contrast, you're in the US and you don't plan on doing business with anyone outside the US, you could go with the standard character set, which is going to reduce your storage footprint. It tends to take twice as much space to store Unicode as it does standard other character sets. But nonetheless, this is something that you don't just want to accept the default on and continue. And I'm going to put an asterisk here because the character set is very difficult to change at the database level once you create the database. So I can't stress enough how important that is to choose wisely initially. So I've mentioned the Database Configuration Assistant, or DBCA, many times. What is this? The DBCA is a graphical Java application that can be called, as you remember, from the Oracle Universal Installer Remember, we can choose to install the instance and then immediately create a database, or as what I did in my demonstration for you, I chose not to create a database at instance creation, and we'll do that in a demo in this nugget separately. Like the OUI, there are several operations to choose from. We can use the DBCA tool to create a database, obviously, but also after database creation, we can come back to configure certain database options that may have been disabled initially. We can delete a database, and we can even manage templates. Now remember that Oracle is different from, say, MySQL or Microsoft SQL Server. You tend to never have, or almost never, have a plethora of databases. I mean, think of SQL Server with the master, the temp, the model database. I mean, a single instance of SQL Server, especially once you start loading Microsoft lab applications like SharePoint, you can get up to 20 or more databases in a single instance. It's not like that with Oracle. You always have a one-to-one correlation between the instance and the database. So you're not going to be running Database Configuration Assistant every day. That having been said, you can save your choices as you work through the DBCA as a template, and there's some built-in ones, as I said earlier. A term that you may see in the Oracle literature, possibly even on your exams, are seeded versus non-seeded templates. A seeded template includes data files, kind of starter data files. Non-seed means you have to create those files yourself. At this point, why don't we pop out into our server environment, and I'll show you how to use the DBCA to create a database. Let's install the database now, shall we? After all, the Oracle instance is of not very much use indeed, unless that instance is attached to a database. So to do that, as you know, we need the Database Configuration Assistant. In Windows, we can get to that utility from our Start menu. We can open up our Oracle Home folder that was created during initial instance installation, and under Configuration and Migration Tools, we have not the Database Upgrade Assistant, but the Database Configuration Assistant. Now notice the launch path for this shortcut. Let me hover over it again. CApp Oracle Product 11.2.0 DB Home 1 bin. In other words, you'll want to make sure that your Oracle Home/bin directory is in the search path regardless of your operating system. A search path means that wherever you are in a command prompt environment, in other words, whatever your present working directory is, you can launch, for instance, SQL Plus or DBCA, and the utility will launch correctly as a result of that. In fact, here it is. Just in case you're not all that clear about search paths, let me show you in Windows where to go to get to this. You can open a command prompt and do the path command, or if you're more of a graphical person, we can right-click Computer, select Properties to open the System Properties. Under Advanced System Settings, this brings you to the traditional Windows XP style System Properties box. We hit Environment Variables, and the path variable is the one we're interested in. I've never liked the editor here. It's very difficult to navigate in this little text box. It's easier to do from a command prompt, actually. But you'll see the very first variable value that was added automatically by the OUI was Oracle Home/bin. So that gives us the ability to launch any Oracle administration tool from wherever we are in the file system. Now, as previously promised, you need to set those path directives manually under Linux. Well, it looks like I've accidentally closed DBCA, so let me come back and get to it again from the Start menu. Database Configuration Assistant. This does launch with an elevated credential, which is to be expected. And by the way, if I open up Start again, I've logged on as my Oracle user, who's my official owner of the Oracle installation. First screen of the Database Configuration Assistant is just a welcome, so we can click Next. The choices we have here, remember that both OUI and the DBCA give us multi-use functionality. We can create a database, we can manage database templates, and these middle options are grayed out, of course, because we don't have a database on this server yet. We just have an instance. But once we do have a database, we can come back in here to configure database options or to drop a database. We're going to create a database, of course. We're asked for a template. Now, a seeded template is a template that actually includes data files. You'll notice that the general purpose or online transaction processing template is seeded, as is the data warehouse template. I would suggest if if you're starting out to select the general purpose. The difference between data warehouse and general purpose and custom is that custom is not seeded. It doesn't include data files. And custom, you're going to have to set your initialization parameters yourself. The nice thing about the database template is that Oracle gives you pre-configured initialization parameters. In fact, you hit Show Details and it brings up a nice HTML page that gives you database components, in other words, what optional features are either enabled or disabled, and then we have a run of the major initialization parameters. We're going to cover most of these. These are the important ones here as we go through the course. It's also going to give us a starter character set, naming convention for our data files, and this is, as I'm sure you know, an OMF compatible path. You'll find that under Oracle Base, we have a subdirectory suggested called Oradata, and that's going to be our go-to file location for our data files. We'll learn about data files and table spaces and all that stuff in due time, as is the control file, also very important. You'll notice that the initial or main control file is located under Oradata as well, and that this template gives us multiplex control file, in other words, a copy of the control file in the pre-configured flash recovery area. Remember, I promised that there's a lot of ground to cover with Oracle. Please know that all of these buzzwords I'm using as we're going along will be explained fully in due time. Step 3 of 12 is to supply the global database name and the SID. Both of these refer to the unique identifier of our database. The global database name can be the name of the database. I'm going to call our database ORCL simply because you'll find in the Oracle literature that ORCL is given as the sample database name there. So this would be unique to your organization. I would suggest 8 characters or fewer. Keep it really simple. The SID, or the system identifier, is going to be the main database name used. The global database name is normally the name of the database plus your DNS domain. You use the global database name to differentiate databases in your environment. We might at Nugget Lab have a dev.nuggetlab.com subdomain in DNS, and we might have an Oracle database called ORCL there as well. And to prevent conflicts on the network, the global database name is used to differentiate those. That's the deal. SID is what we'll be using in this course, though, specifically. Step 4 of 12 asks us if we want to use the Web Database Control utility, also called Oracle Enterprise Manager. I would suggest we absolutely leave this alone. If we're using grid infrastructure, which is beyond the scope of this training, we would have this second option available to us, and we could link into a master grid control where on one server you could manage all of the Oracle instances in that grid infrastructure. Because we're using the Database Control / Enterprise Manager web-based tool, we optionally have the ability to enable alert notifications. We would put in the fully qualified domain name of our Simple Mail Transfer Protocol server and the recipient email address. This could be an alias that goes to all your DBAs or just you specifically. We can also do an enable daily disk backup to the flash recovery area. These are just nice things that Oracle gives us as options. They're best practices, really. We'll be talking about backup and recovery quite a bit later in the course, as we will be talking about alerts as well. I'm going to leave that alone. We are going to configure database control though, so I'll leave the radio button enabled. If we switch over to automatic maintenance tasks, as soon as we do that, we get this warning that tells us that configuring our database with the database control website requires a listener to be configured in the current Oracle home. We need to run netca to configure a listener before we proceed. Otherwise, you may choose to continue without. Now, what do they mean by this? Again, we're going to be talking about listeners a lot in the future. A listener is basically a TCP/IP socket, an IP address, a host name, a protocol port number that's used by Oracle to listen for incoming network connections. And netca is the network configuration assistant. So if we come back to Oracle Home, Configuration and Migration Tools, Net Configuration Assistant, let's just pop this guy open. We're going to deal with this later in the course as well, but it's nice that it comes up now. It asks us in this wizard what we want to do. I'm just going to cut right to the chase. We're going to do listener configuration. We don't have a listener yet, so we're going to add one. The default name is listener, and that's fine with me. We're asked which network protocols will be used for listening for incoming connections. I'm going to bring over IPC. That's inter-process communications, and it's used within the local server when you're logged on interactively. TCP is the most common protocol, the transmission control protocol, and I'll leave that first in the list. The standard TCP/IP port number that's used with the listener is 1521, and because that's a well-known port, of course it's a vector of attack. So in a production environment, you'll probably want to change that to a non-standard port number. In the training, I'm going to keep it at the default though. Windows Firewall is asking me to allow access because it detects that there is a listener. If we're using IPC, we need a key value. I'm going to just use IPC as that key value, and we're going to say no, we don't need another listener. So we're finished. Let's finish out of this Net Configuration Assistant, come back over to Automatic Maintenance Tasks, as I did before. I would suggest you leave this alone. Oracle has some really nice self-tuning maintenance tasks that run, as this says here, in a predefined maintenance window of 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. on weekdays and all weekend long, and we can change these defaults using Enterprise Manager, which we will later in the course. Step 5 of 12 in the DBCA is to set security for your built-in default administrative accounts. We're going to be working with these a lot as we go on. SYS is the equivalent of the SQL Server SA account. It's an absolute super user. You want to absolutely protect this account. Be very careful of how it's used. System is a sub-DBA account. It still has almost full control. DBSNMP, if you're familiar with a simple network management protocol, is used for that. Lesser used in my experience. And Sysman is a built-in user that's used for database management, not so much user management, but database management. Now, the recommendation is to set a separate password for each one of these. You can just click in the box and put the password and confirm it. If you really want to live dangerously, or if you're in a dev environment like I am, we can use the same password for all accounts, which I will right now. Now, there is a built-in password complexity policy into Oracle. You're probably familiar with this with password policy if you've used Windows. And it tells us we should have minimum of 8 characters, 1 uppercase character, 1 lowercase character, and a digit. I'm going to continue anyway. We're next asked where we're going to store our database files and what storage type we're going to use. Your choices are file system, where you pick the directory path for your files, or automatic storage management, which gives us 2 tiers of ability. We can use what are called Oracle managed files, where we can browse to a disk group that we've created in ASM. Now again, I'm using terminology that we haven't yet come to. Let me just simplify and say, unless you've installed automatic storage management, which is putting all of your faith in Oracle to manage your files, you'll want to choose file system. You actually have to install automatic storage management separately, and once you do that, you can create automatic storage management disk groups, as they're called, and then just specify which disk group you're going to store your files in, and you're good to go. I'm going to choose the file system, and the default there is to use a common location for all database files, and it brings in the Oracle base environment variable as previously discussed, and then the Aura data subfolder. Now, how does the DBCA understand where Oracle base is? That's where we get into environment variables again. And remember, I said in Windows, let me fire open regedit, environment variables are stored in the registry. You still may want to use the set command or the system properties dialog to set those environment variables manually. Definitely, actually, I would put them in both places. But in the registry, you'll find under HKey local machine, software, Oracle, you'll find a key for each Oracle home, and then underneath that key, you'll have your path. So you see here, let me stretch this out. We have some important ones. We have Oracle base, Oracle home, SQL path, etc. So just wanted to show you that as we go on. If you hit File Location Variables, it simply brings up what the DBCA understands are those variable names, Oracle base, Oracle home, and you'll notice, I don't know if you did notice when I had regedit open, other variables haven't been updated in the registry yet, like the database name, the database unique name, and the system ID, simply because we haven't yet actually created the database. We're still in process. Flash recovery area is very important. I'd always recommend you keep this. I'm going to turn this off right now, but we're going to enable it a little bit later in the course. Flash recovery is the default area for your backups. It makes it a lot easier to run backups when you don't have to specify a hunk and file path. Archiving is cool because it archives your redo log files and gives you a wider restore window if you have problems. I'm going to leave those off. We're going to enable those separately later in the course. Sample schema is an important thing in a development environment. This gives you, as it tells us, some sample schemas or object collections in the database. There's HR, order entry, online catalog, etc. and it puts the files in a table space called example. The footprint is low. You don't want sample schemas in your production database, but we'll be relying upon these as we use examples in the course. And you'll find also in the Oracle literature, they oftentimes will rely upon those sample schemas too. If we have extra scripts that we want to slipstream into the database creation, we can add those. I'm not going to do that though here. This is going to be a pretty plain vanilla database installation. There's a lot going on in step 9 of 11, setting initialization parameters. A lot. We have 4 general categories: memory options, sizing options, character sets, and connection mode. So much to cover here. We can't all cover it in this nugget. So just rest assured that the defaults are okay to start. Basically, what we have here is a graphical interface to the major initialization parameters for the database. If we click all initialization parameters, this actually is an interactive window where you can set values directly if you want to, if you know what you're doing. And you'll notice if you make some changes, you'll be overriding what's set as a default in the template. Automatic memory management is enabled, so your max target is going to be your upper level limit for RAM that Oracle can use. You can use a slider to adjust the max mem. Sizing is where we can set our block size, our Oracle block size. Character set, you want to be careful here. Just don't run and use the default without thinking about it. You may decide to use Unicode if, for instance, you're working for a multinational organization where you have business and you're storing data from other languages, or even, I know in my personal experience, if you're storing stuff from Europe, you might have the British pound symbol, the euro, and these things are not included in the default character set. We'll need Unicode for that. I'm going to leave default for mine though. And connection mode defaults to dedicated server, which spawns a separate PGA for each connection. That's going to consume more RAM, but it's going to give your users a more memory protected area. We'll be dealing with the pluses and minuses of dedicated mode versus shared server mode, where connections are pooled to save RAM. And once we're satisfied with our initial outlay of initialization parameters, we can click Next. Step 10 of 11, database storage, is another very intimidating dialogue if you're not sure what's going on. I trust that by the end of this course you will understand all of this and be very much an expert with it. Basically what you're doing here is specifying the location, since we did specify the file system as opposed to Oracle managed files or automatic storage management for the location of our core database files, which are, as you know now, the control file, your data files, and your online redo log files. So this is a nice graphical front end that enables you to specify paths for multiplexing your control file mirrors, your data files, and your redo log groups. Now, all 3 of these redo log groups has a online redo log file, but you'll notice that the path is exactly the same. We're absolutely going to want to change this after installation. We're going to want to make sure we have at least 1 or 2 separate disk drives available where we can spread the redo log groups over those drives to make sure we're doing parallel processing and maximizing failover redundancy. Same thing for a control file. Both mirror copies of the control file are on the same disk. That's not best practice, but it's fine to get us started. Final step here is, are we actually going to create the database, which is the default, and or are we going to save all of the settings we've selected so far as a database template such that future runs of the DBCA can pick up those settings? We can optionally generate a database creation script, which I will choose here. It'll be placed under Oracle Base Admin Database Name Scripts. Let's click Finish. Gives us a summary screen. We can save this report as HTML if we want. Let me move the window up a little bit and click OK. And now the DBCA is off and running. This is going to take a little while, so just hurry up and wait. All right, database creation complete. Let's click Exit. And to verify that our instance is up and running, one way to go, among many, is we can open our Oracle Home folder. You'll notice a new shortcut called Database Control, and notice it defaults to HTTPS, secure HTTP. The host name, which on this box is OraNugget, 1158 is the default management port, /EM. Now, because we're using HTTPS and Oracle is giving us its server certificate, when compared against the Trusted Root certification authorities in Internet Explorer 8, which I'm using here, there's a mismatch. So you're bound to see this. There is a problem with this website security certificate error. It's okay for us to choose the not recommended choice. In fact, we're going to have to. I'll enable intranet settings in IE8. And we're given our connection dialog. So it looks like database control is up and running. Now I'm not going to be able to log in as the sys user here because there's the default password. That's not a good choice anyway. So I'm going to open an elevated command prompt and we're going to change the sys password right now. I'm going to log into the SQL Plus utility using my operating system account, the Oracle account, and I'm logging in as a super user with the sys DBA privilege. I'm going to alter the user sys and I'm going to put in a new password. There we go. Just this much, the fact that I'm logged into SQL Plus tells us that the database is up and running. But now we can come back, log in as sys. I'm going to use the sysdba role, put in the correct password, and away we go. The database is up and running. Oracle Database Administration Tools. We've used some of these first-party built-in tools already, specifically the Oracle Universal Installer and the Database Configuration Assistant. Once you've installed an instance, you can come back and open the OUI again and examine what's called the OUI or Oracle Inventory. As you install Oracle products on a server, all of those products and their metadata are stored in what's called the Oracle Inventory in Extensible Markup Language or XML format. This makes it easier, again, especially in the case of multiple Oracle homes, multiple instances, multiple versions of Oracle, multiple databases, to know what's there in the case of, say, deinstallation, patching, upgrade, etc. During the Database Config Assistant, as you know, we have the option to install Enterprise Manager support. This is a small, relatively low footprint HTTP server application using Java. There's two varieties of Enterprise Manager. The one that we're solely concerned with in this training is called Database Control, and this deals with that one-to-one relationship, single instance, single database. Alternatively, if you install a separate package to facilitate the Oracle Grid infrastructure, you can install the Grid Control version of Enterprise Manager, and this allows you to control several Oracle servers from one spot. The mainline DB admin tool is SQL Plus, also called SQL Plus. You'll hear me refer to it under both names, I'm sure. This is your traditional command line interface to an Oracle database. You're familiar, I'm sure, with the MySQL client if you've used MySQL, or SQL CMD if you've used Microsoft SQL Server. However, I find in my experience that most Oracle DBAs are very fluent with SQL Plus and tend to use this as their go-to tool. Here's the deal. Not only for your exam success, but also in your careers as Oracle DBAs, you need to be extremely familiar with SQL Plus because you can rely on it always being there. Remember we talked about the optimal flexible architecture. If you're working as a database consultant and you go to a client site, you can't just assume that they're going to have your favorite third-party DBA tool, like Toad, for instance, available. All that they may have are what's built into the Oracle software. And of course, the software doesn't come with the graphical SQL Developer tool. That requires a separate installation, even though it is made by Oracle. However, you can never escape the fact that an installation of Oracle will always have SQL Plus. So it's a reliable tool and absolutely needs your mastery. This command line interface can be used interactively, in which we log into SQL Plus and issue commands. Those commands can be SQL Plus internal commands and or SQL commands that conform to the ANSI 92 standard. We can also run SQL Plus in batch mode. This is where we simply run the SQL Plus executable from the Linux or Windows command line and specify the name of an SQL script, possibly a PL SQL package that we want to launch. To repeat for like the 10th time, you'll want to make sure that the Oracle Home bin directory is part of your search path such that you can launch SQL Plus from anywhere in your environment. Oracle SQL Developer is somewhat similar to the SQL Server Management Studio or the MySQL GUI admin tool. It's a Java application that requires the Java runtime environment. Download it for free from the Oracle site, and it has quite a bit going for it. It's not particularly fast. It's a little bit pokey in my experience, but especially as a learning tool and as a way to better visualize what's in a database, I think it really can't be beat. And you can't beat the price, that's for sure. Now, for your own home environment, assuming that you're already familiar and you have expertise with SQL Plus, database control, and possibly SQL Developer, you might in time decide to move to a third-party administrative tool. There's plenty of Oracle administrative tools out there. They have many nice bells and whistles built into them. Two of the most popular that have the largest market share are Navicat for Oracle, navicat.com, and Toad for Oracle. I would give Toad the general overall nod, but your mileage may vary. Check out Wikipedia also if you want to see a comprehensive comparison of database tools. That's actually the name of this page in Wikipedia, and you'll be able to see other choices. I would suggest that you, again, assuming that you have initial familiarity and expertise with SQL Plus, download the trial versions of a bunch of these tools and see which ones are a better fit. I mean, they go far beyond the capability of SQL Developer. The Toad DBA suite, for instance, has query optimization wizards. It has advanced data modeling capabilities. You can do a great deal of good with those Toad tools. However, and this probably goes without saying yet, I'll say it anyway, you're not going to be asked any questions on your Oracle certification exam dealing with third-party tools, and that's only fair. All you're expected to know are the Oracle tools. Finally, before we do our second demo on some of those tools, I wanted to give you a heads up in case you weren't familiar with cygwin. If you're a Linux, Unix person already, you're probably already familiar with this. However, if you're a Windows person and you're curious about the Linux, Unix variants in managing Oracle, then you might want to consider using cygwin. Or by contrast, if you're a Linux person and you're forced to use a Windows environment for Oracle, you can use cygwin just to give you your familiar shell environment. Cygwin is an open source display server, as it's called. It's a Unix-like environment for Windows. You can download the packages from cygwin.com, cygwin.com. The purposes of cygwin, like I said, is to give a bash shell environment, a traditional Unix, Linux shell environment to folks under Windows, such that instead of the Windows command dir to run a directory listing, under cygwin you would use ls. Instead of the Windows find, you would use grep, etc. So this also has some nice day-to-day purposes for Oracle administrators. Oracle administrators may have some really great Unix shell scripts to perform things like database optimization and database backups. You can actually run those Linux, Unix shell scripts under cygwin in Windows. Alternatively, you can perform Oracle installation and management tasks under cygwin just as if you were actually on a Linux, Unix box. This is free and open source software and potentially worth your looking into. In this demonstration, we'll look at Oracle Database Management Utilities. Opening the Start menu, after we install Oracle 11g Database, the instance, we wind up with a folder in Windows named after that instance, in this case Home 1, and then inside of there we have a number of other shortcut folders as well as executables. First, we have a link to the database control. This is the web-based Oracle Enterprise Manager application. Let me pop that up for a moment. The two main ways to do day-to-day administration in Oracle are the graphical way using database control, as you see here, or by using the SQL Plus client utility. Some old-school Oracle DBAs whose experience predates Oracle Enterprise Manager strongly prefer the SQL Plus route. Other folks, more contemporary DBAs perhaps, like the flexibility in Enterprise Manager. You're probably wondering, well, what's going to be covered on my 052 exam? The answer to that, friends, is both. You absolutely need to understand how to use SQL or SQL Plus, however you want to pronounce that is fine with me, as well as understanding SQL code. By contrast, you can also expect some questions on your exam that include screen captures from database control. So we're going to be concentrating on both methods for administering an Oracle database in this course. Now, SQL Plus, if it's in your search path, means you can launch it from anywhere you are in the command prompt environment. Alternatively, we can find a shortcut to SQL Plus in our Start menu. Now, in a Linux environment, it's much more manual, as previously discussed. You just need to make sure that your search path focuses on your Oracle Home bin subdirectory so you can call these tools from a terminal session. Let me also come down to Oracle installation products. The Universal Installer shortcut is always available to us here, regardless of our operating system. And you'll remember that we can open the Oracle Universal Installer anytime after instance installation to perform maintenance tasks. You'll see how that works as soon as this pops up. Once you have at least one instance of Oracle installed, the welcome screen for the OUI looks a little bit different. Notice that we can tap into the Oracle inventory, which gives us a run of currently installed Oracle homes and currently installed Oracle database versions. We can also uninstall products from the system if we want to, or we can proceed to the next step and deploy a new instance if we're in a situation where we want more than one instance on a single server, which we don't in this case. Let me open an elevated command prompt and let me show you SQL Plus. If you start SQL Plus with the no log switch, this gets you into the SQL Plus environment but doesn't establish a connection to the database. To make a connection to the database, we can use the connect keyword, and I'm going to connect using my currently logged in Windows credential as sysdba. This is what you'll do if and only if you're logged onto your host operating system as a member of the DBA group in Linux or the Aura DBA group in Windows. In fact, let me show you that right now. I'll open up the computer management console here on my Windows machine. Alternatively, in an Active Directory environment, you'll want to open up the Active Directory Administrative Center or Active Directory Users and Computers. And if I come into groups, you'll see, sure enough, the Oracle DBA group, Aura_DBA, that was created for us automatically by the Oracle installer. And the way this works here is that any Windows user account that's placed into Aura DBA, by default it's just your operating system installation account. I've added my trainer account myself. Those identities are able to log into the database using their Windows operating system credential, and they can wear the super user's cloak of sysdba privilege. That can be helpful because alternatively, let me disconnect. You can connect as a built-in identity or as an Oracle identity, but here we'll be prompted for a password, you see? Now there's a lot we can do here in SQL Plus or SQL Plus. That's something that you'll find some interesting communications on, is how to pronounce some of these utilities. You'll find that I refer myself, Tim Warner, the instructor in DBA, I refer to the structured query language as SQL pretty habitually, but as far as the SQL Plus utility, you'll hear me say SQL Plus or SQL Plus alternatively. It really doesn't matter. Now you notice the name of the utility is SQL Star Plus. Some folks even pronounce the star, but I don't think that's necessary. I think the star is just a separator or a delimiter between the two words. That's a little bit too nerdy for most people to worry about. We'll be working with SQL Plus a lot going forward. In the interest of time, let me move on to some other administrative utilities. If we open the Start menu again and open our Oracle Home, under Application Development, we will see, if we hover over this SQL Developer shortcut, that this paths out into our Oracle Home, into a SQL Developer subfolder, bin SQLDeveloper.bat. And supposedly this is going to run a batch file that loads the SQL Developer binaries, but it doesn't work. I've never had that shortcut actually work in any of my installations. So what I always recommend anyway, friends, is to go out to the Oracle website and download the latest and greatest version of SQL Developer. I've done that, and I've unpacked the archive. There are two versions of SQL Developer. Actually, why don't we head out onto the web and I'll show you them directly. Here we are at the Oracle SQL Developer page. I'm going to accept the Oracle Technology Network License Agreement, and then if we scroll scroll down, basically these are not installers. You just unpack the archive and you can run the Java executable itself. Now, the SQL Developer as a Java application does require a Java desktop environment installed. So they give you two versions here. Let me scroll down to where we are in Windows. There's 32-bit and 64-bit Windows. Interestingly, there's only 32-bit Windows SQL Developer that does include the Java development environment. So if you happen to not have Java installed on your system and you download an SQL version without the JDK, it's simply not going to work. SQL Developer is also available for Mac OS and Linux, of course. Okay, so once you unpack the archive, you get your JDK business out of the way, you can launch the executable. I'm going to force it to run as an administrator. It takes a little while to start up, which in my experience is the case with Java applications across the board. At first run, we're asked to configure our associations. For instance, do we want to associate SQL script files with SQL developers? And there's plenty of options for procedural SQL as well. I'll just for now leave the SQL association and come in. Tips of the day are pretty interesting. You can cycle through those. If you don't want to see tips, just unselect Show Tips at Startup and close the box. I think this is a nicely documented utility. Remember that SQL Developer is intended as a graphical front end and query tool. You can add on functionality to SQL Developer. The latest add-on includes data modeling capability, which is pretty helpful for data architects for sure. You'll notice the home page here includes tutorials, online demonstrations. SQL Developer is pretty well bought into by the Oracle folks. You'll note that we really can't do anything unless we add a connection. So on the Connections tab, let's click the plus sign, and we're going to create a connection where we log in as the sys user. So I'll call the connection sys to let me know what it is. I will save the password because I'm in a secure environment right now. I want to make sure that I'm coming in as sys DBA. Note that we could do OS authentication if we wanted to. Host name, localhost, port is 1521. That's perfectly okay. We don't have to go over the network here. What we do need to do is change the system ID from XE, which is the default SID for Oracle Express Edition, and put in the name of our database, which, as you know, is ORCL. We'll click Test, and the status in the lower left tells us that this was successful. We'll click Save to save the connection details, and Connect to make a connection to the database. Once we've done that, we can now expand sys and take a look at all of the objects within the database. This really, especially for beginners, will light up your experience pretty well. Over on the right, you can add your SQL code to your heart's content. Click the Run box. Click the Run button, and you see your statement output down below. Show User is used when you're in an SQL user session and you want to know who your currently logged on user is. We'll be working with SQL Developer later in the course. Some folks really like it. Other folks prefer the orthodoxy of using a plain text editor like Vim in Linux or Notepad in Windows. But I wanted to make you aware of this as yet another option for administering an Oracle database. Finally, I'm going to open a run prompt and show you a Windows-only built-in management tool for Oracle 11g database that I like a lot. By opening up the MMC prompt, or rather by opening up a run prompt and typing MMC, this opens a brand new blank Microsoft Management Console, and if we select File, Add Remove Snap-in, we'll find if we scroll down, once you've installed the instance in a database, you have what's called the Oracle Primary MMC Snap-in. Not very descriptive, I might say, and the actual internal snap-in is called Oracle Managed Objects. If we expand that object, we can take a look at our computer. Of course, this is just our local host or a nugget, and it gives us access to things like our Oracle homes, who our database administrators are, who our database operators are, and then the database itself. This is not just a look but not touch utility. You can actually make changes here. So for instance, if I right-click OS Database Administrators and select Add Remove, I can make changes here to the membership of those groups. If you right-click the Home folder and select Properties, this shows you the initialization parameters for the instance. And notice that this isn't just a look list, but you can actually edit these initialization parameters right in the window. Remember I mentioned before we ran the DBCA, I showed you the initialization parameters and it was missing ones like DB name and Oracle SID. Now that we've completed the database creation and linked it to the instance, we now see several database-specific initialization parameters in this list. If we right-click the database itself, you can connect to another database, you can stop Oracle, we have startup and shutdown options, and specify the shutdown mode. We're going to work with starting up and shutting down an instance in a future nugget. Process information is especially interesting because we can take a look at those background processes, which aren't as easy to analyze under Windows as they are with Linux. With Linux, we can run PS and see these, each one having a process ID. In Windows, as you know, this stuff all runs under the Oracle exe master service. Let me right-click the taskbar and select Show Task Manager, and if we look at our process list, we'll show processes from all users. There's Oracle right here, consuming about 400 megs of memory, and there's some other related services as well. But here we can see those specific processes, and you can actually kill those processes in certain cases if you're troubleshooting. So there you have it, a brief tour of the built-in administrative utilities of Oracle 11g database. Creating an Oracle database review. In this nugget, we learned the planning mechanics or the planning questions before we create an Oracle database. But then specifically toward our exam objectives, we learned how to use the database config assistant to instantiate a database on an Oracle server. You also understand now the basic built-in Oracle database administration tools. I threw a lot of terminology at you over the course of this nugget. Please don't feel overwhelmed. Take comfort in the fact that every one of those vocab words that I so blithely tossed around during my demos will be fully explained. Just try to stick to the broad points right now, covering creating a database using DBCA and those built-in Oracle tools, SQL Plus, SQL Developer, Database Control, and you're good to go. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.